Millfield was the kind of town people painted with broad strokes of nostalgia, tree-lined streets, the scent of freshly baked bread drifting from corner bakeries, and neighbors who waved as you passed by. But that veneer of small-town charm masked a brutal secret that had been deliberately erased from history. A secret so dark it seemed to lurk in the shadows, waiting for someone brave enough to pull it into the harsh light of day. It all began with a cluster of disappearances in the summer of 1982, focused on a working-class neighborhood on the town's fringes. This neighborhood, known locally as the East End, was home to Millfield's immigrant families, predominantly people of color and struggling blue-collar workers. To the town's elite, the East End was an inconvenient reminder of poverty and diversity, a community they'd rather forget. Between June and August of that year, nearly 50 residents vanished without a trace. Children, parents, elders, entire families simply disappeared overnight. Official reports claimed these people had left to find work elsewhere or had relocated due to economic hardships. But those explanations never sat right with locals or activists who had long suspected a far more sinister truth. For decades, the East End's mass disappearance was treated as a ghost story, whispered in hushed tones but never publicly investigated. Any attempt to question the official narrative was met with hostility, intimidation, or outright threats. Local law enforcement dismissed concerned citizens as troublemakers. The town council repeatedly blocked calls for independent inquiries. Millfield's power players seemed united in a silent pact to keep the massacre buried. Enter Emily Carter, a sharp, relentless investigative journalist in her late 20s. Emily had grown up hearing her grandmother's fragmented stories about the East End. Tales of neighbors who never returned, families torn apart, and a town that looked the other way. Emily carried the weight of these stories with her, determined to expose the truth no matter the cost. Starting with dusty town archives and forgotten police reports, Emily soon discovered glaring inconsistencies and redacted files. She tracked down survivors who had been forced into silence, some too terrified to speak, others too broken to tell their stories. Piece by piece, a horrifying picture emerged. The disappearances were not random nor accidental. They were the result of a calculated, violent purge orchestrated by a coalition of local industrialists, police officials, and political figures. These men saw the East End's predominantly immigrant population as a barrier to their vision of progress. A vision that involved razing the neighborhood to build factories and warehouses. The massacre was meticulously planned. On a single moonless night, armed men swept through the East End, rounding up residents. Those who resisted were tortured and killed on the spot. Others were taken to isolated locations where they faced unspeakable horrors. The bodies of many victims were burned in hastily dug pits on the outskirts of town. Their remains never recovered. Survivors were threatened into silence or forced to flee Millfield altogether. What made this atrocity worse was how the system enabled it. The local police and fire departments were complicit, either directly participating or turning blind eyes. Newspapers refused to publish Emily's early findings, labeling her work tabloid nonsense. Politicians denied any wrongdoing, and key witnesses mysteriously disappeared or recanted their statements. But Emily's most damning discovery came from financial documents. She uncovered a trail of money funneled from factory owners to law enforcement, disguising bribes as community development funds. The massacre was not just an act of racial and class-based violence. It was a crime driven by greed, exploitation, and the ruthless pursuit of power. Despite mounting threats, surveillance, anonymous phone calls warning her to stop, and attempts to sabotage her credibility, Emily pressed on. She partnered with civil rights activists, forensic experts, and legal advocates. Together, they began to organize public hearings and demand federal investigations. The town of Millfield was forced into a confrontation with its own past. Old wounds reopened as families of the disappeared came forward, sharing their stories for the first time. The silence that had protected the killers was breaking. But the road to justice was far from certain. Powerful interests fought back, using media spin, intimidation tactics, and legal maneuvers to discredit the victims and derail the investigation. Local police departments resisted cooperation. Millfield's community was divided, some desperate for truth and accountability, others clinging to the comfortable lies of the past. As Emily prepared to release her most explosive report yet, one that included audio recordings of meetings where the massacre was planned, names of those involved, and detailed forensic evidence, she realized that this story was more than just a local tragedy. It was a harsh indictment of systemic racism, corruption, and the devastating consequences when society values profit over human life. And the question remained, would Millfield finally reckon with its hidden horror, or would this massacre remain a ghost in the town's history forever?